Growing up, one of the most awkward things being a Catholic I found was having to make the sign of a cross at a restaurant. It was always something I kind of dreaded whenever we'd go out as a family to a restaurant. So often I'd hope that my parents would forget to say the sign of the cross before a meal. And sometimes I would feel like time would kind of stand still and all eyes were on me as our family made the sign of the cross at a restaurant. And so I was embarrassed by it. And I did see it as kind of an unnecessary way just to show others in public that I was Catholic. So I'm sure I'm not alone in this struggle. When I think that I'm in the presence of a clinical psychologist now, Father Brian, I wonder what he's thinking right now as he hears me explain this. Maybe we'll have a counseling session later. But in today's homily, I'd just like to share 3 reasons for why we do make the sign of the cross, and hopefully these can inspire us to not only make the sign of the cross more often, but to do it slowly and out of love. To make things simple, I'll connect these 3 reasons with just the 3 movements that we make during the sign of the cross. So first, we touch our heads, and this shows our belief in the cross. We touch our hearts to show our love for the cross. And then we touch our shoulders to show our desire to take up the cross. So I'll go through these 3 steps. So first we touch our heads to show our belief in the cross. Recently, I was doing a CCO faith study called Discovery, and it showed St. Catherine of Siena. She had this famous vision in which she saw all of humanity on one side and God on another. And there was this great raging river that separated us from God. And this great raging river symbolized sin. And so it made it impossible for us to cross over and be with God. No matter how hard we tried, we couldn't cross the river to get to God. And so what did God do? Out of love, God became man in Jesus. And by his death on the cross, he created a bridge that crossed over the river to allow us to walk safely back to be with God. And so when we touch our foreheads to show our belief in the cross, we're proclaiming that the cross has been this great act of God's love in which he's created this bridge for us to be with God again. And second, we touch our hearts. This shows our love of the cross. St. John Vianney, one of the greatest saints in church history, said that all of our problems in life come from our not loving the cross. He says that it's fear of the cross which gives weight to the cross. And that the key in life is to journey from this fear of the cross to a love of the cross. And how do we do this? How do we journey from a fear of the cross, fear of suffering, to a love of the cross? Well, for St. John Vianney, he said this happens in prayer. He said that everything in his life changed when he started praying for a love of the cross. And this is a really hard prayer to say, to ask Jesus for a love of the cross. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it because the cross is the place where perfect love casts out all fear. The cross is a place where suffering can be changed into an encounter with the love of God. And there's a teacher that I've had in seminary who's been a role model for Father Brian and myself. And he told me one day of a story of a man who was going through a very difficult time, struggling with certain sins. And this man went to this priest for spiritual direction and asked him for counseling, asked him for help and how to overcome this one particular sin he was really struggling with. The priest counseled him to actually take the cross from the wall that he had up and embrace it to his heart whenever he felt a strong desire to fall into sin. A week later, this man came to the priest and said that on Friday night, he felt a strong desire to fall into sin. He was about to walk out of the apartment, and he saw the cross just above the door. And he remembered what the priest had told him. And with courage, he took the cross from the wall and embraced it to his heart. And he fell down on the ground, started weeping. And for this man, this was a real encounter of what it means to love the cross, because for this man, in that experience, he actually saw God's love transform a really difficult thing he was going through, to have this real encounter with God. For this man, this vision that St. Catherine of Siena had of this cross as the bridge, this man actually walked that bridge. He actually got to live out this experience of encountering God's love in the midst of something he was really struggling with. So it's going from this head knowledge of the cross to a real heart knowledge, to be able to experience God's love in our suffering. And so when we touch our hearts, when we do the sign of the cross, we can ask God for the grace to have a love of the cross, because this is the place where God wants to enter in to your suffering, to your difficulties, and allow his love to transform what you're going through into an experience of his love. And then after we touch our hearts, we touch our shoulders. And this shows our desire to take up the cross. So once we have known in our minds that the cross is this great sign of God's love, and then experienced it in our hearts, once we've experienced the love of God, love always calls us to action. And so to respond to God's great love, we want to take up the cross. And this gets to the heart of today's gospel. Jesus calls us to say, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And these are really difficult words to hear. This is the whole reason why I arrived at this homily, is because when I read the gospel and I heard these words from Jesus, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me, I sensed a certain fear in my own heart that there are times in my life when I don't want to take up the cross, or when I hope that my life could be different. And so I had to really pray about it and ask Jesus for an experience of his love in this difficulty that I was having in my own life. But what I do know, and what I've been praying with throughout the week, is that Jesus took up the cross. He led the way for us. And this decision of him to take up the cross out of love for us changed the life changed all of our lives forever. And if we follow him on this path, if we take up the cross ourselves and we follow him, it too can change our lives forever. And I had a friend tell me of this amazing story recently in which he went to a restaurant. And after saying grace at the end of the meal, he was walking out of the restaurant. And an elderly woman grabbed him by the arm as he was leaving this restaurant. And she said, "Why did you do that over there?" He was saying, "What did I do?" She said, "Why did you make the sign of the cross before you left the table?" And he went on to explain some of the reasons for why he makes the sign of the cross. And as the conversation developed, this woman shared with him that she had just lost her husband. She felt she had no more reason to live. And she had actually planned for that meal at the restaurant to be her last meal ever. But this one conversation, based upon one man deciding to make the sign of a cross at a restaurant, doing it slowly, she could sense doing it out of love, changed this woman's life forever, brought a new sense of hope and purpose in her life. So for us too, this can change not only our lives, but the lives of others. And so I encourage everyone just to make the sign of the cross more often. When you touch your head, just to recall this great act of love that God has done for us. He's been the bridge builder to allow us to get back into life with God. And to touch your hearts, asking for a love of the cross, to experience God's love in your suffering, in your difficulties. And then touch your shoulders when you do so, asking Jesus to take up the cross. And as you do it slowly and out of love, just like as my friend shared, you could change someone's life forever.